I love basing models. It is the thing that takes them from toys and turns them into miniatures, setting them in an environment. The thing about basing though is I often don't try that hard. And there's a good reason for that, and that is because I love to collect armies. And I know that if I'm gonna be building and painting 20, 50, 100, 200 of the same models, I gotta pick something reasonable and doable. However, every once in a while, I get a great opportunity to break that rule. Recently, I have fallen in love with Age of Sigmar, specifically the Spearhead format. It is so much fun to play, and what's great is you just play with these things that come in the Spearhead boxes. I have my Ogor Mawtribes Spearhead complete, but if you notice, none of these guys are on bases. Now sure, I could throw down a little bit of texture paste and a little bit of snow and have them done, but I only have to do these ogres in front of me. I'll never have to paint another ogre. Why not go all out on the bases and have something really epic? In front of me, I got 10 ogres standing on 40mm bases, the 2 Mournfangs on 90mm oval bases, and over there, the Iron Blaster on the dreaded 120mm oval base, which prior to 2015 was called the Flying Stand base, because prior to that, only flyers used it. I physically have a lot of ground to cover. I have been filling up my evenings, painting up my ogres to my highest level, and when I paint a model really good, I have a theory on basing. I have my Black Templars based incredibly simply, as I love to splash on every detail, and when it comes to the bases, I want them bland so that they don't draw any attention away from my minis, and so I don't waste any Templar hobby time working on the floors. Just a little wood chips, some sand, and 2 colors, earth and light tan. And similarly, my Death Guard are psychedelically painted, and so I keep the bases dull, with a little texture paste and puddles of Elmer's glue mixed with super glue to make them suitably sticky looking. I don't want attention drawn to the bases. I think this theory holds true, but I don't think dull and bland are the key takeaways. I've been painting up random bad guy models for a mini-agnostic game called Don't Look Back, and as this game can be played in any environment, I thought maybe instead of one unifying scheme, I instead use a unifying color, and if they're all the same, I can get away with a bright saturated color, and in this case, red. I want to take this hypothesis and use it on my ogres. I want to go all out on the bases, and if I keep the color palette simple, maybe I can get away with bases with a lot of depth and detail. I have been doing a lot of gaming with these minis, and so I have them poster tacked down to their respective bases. It gets the job done, and it's easy to get off with just a little bit of rubbing. Now I want depth, and to get that I need to build up some height, and the best way to do this is with cork. I have found over the years that 1/4 inch cork is great, typically found in tiles, 1/8 inch cork is usually on rolls, and I like this stuff and it's 1/2 inch rough cork. I found it all at Michael's Arts and Crafts. I started out by supergluing the cork to the bases. I put 1/4 inch on half and 1/8 inch cork on the other half. I ripped away the excess so that they're all nice and round. Then I picked about half the bases and gave them a double layer of cork so I had a variety of heights throughout the bases. Now for the Mournfangs, I want to make them a little special, marching along rocky outcroppings. I used the rough cork and hot glue to make some cliffs, and I carved them into shape with a handsaw. What makes cork so great for this is it's very light and strong, and the broken sides of it look very natural once it's painted up. I used a bunch of mismatched pieces to get the shapes I want, and then I used the flexible 1/8 inch cork, laying it on top for a flat surface. To fill in some of the bigger gaps, I used kitty litter and ultra thin super glue. I like this method because it's self-leveling and it dries instantly. Then for the Iron Blaster, this thing is huge and it needs a lot of flat space to sit properly. So I traced it out with a pencil so I knew where I could safely build up material. Then I used my Dremel tool with a sanding drum and I rounded out the cork. Not everywhere, I did this to about 1/4 of each base. I glued down a lot of the scrap cork I made over the course of the project, making sure that these were in spots that wouldn't be in the way of ogre feet later. And to further smooth the cork, I used Vallejo Diorama FX. I pooled this around the cork to hide the layers. This stuff doesn't shrink too much so you can build it up pretty thick. On each base, I laid down a little bit of wood glue and sprinkled on some coarse and fine-grained sand. The trick to making this look natural is to pool the sand in the middle of the puddle and then feather it out so that not all the glue gets sand on it. After that, my bases were done. Typically, when I hobby, I build my models first, then I build the bases, attach them, and then paint them. And I think that's another reason why my bases often end up a little bit more on the plain side, because I've run out of a lot of hobby steam after I've done building my models. It is definitely a more interesting project to work on all of the bases together, where I can give them a little extra zhuzh without worrying about running out of time. And speaking of zhuzh, if you notice, all of these bases are lovely Cobalt Keep bases, today's sponsor. Cobalt Keep makes the very highest quality wargaming bases the perfect thing to go under your model's feet. What makes these bases so premium is they are made from more plastic than their competitors, giving their bases a robust and strong feel, especially noticeable on the big bases, ensuring that there is no warping no matter how extravagant you get with their decorating. Cobalt Keep has all the sizes you need, whether it's hordes of 25mm bases for your squishy infantry, square bases for your nostalgic army, or the big bases for monster armies, except no substitute. And flipping a Cobalt Keep base upside down, you'll see the integrated magnet well, perfect for accepting a nice strong magnet that their bases are sold with or without. These magnets are perfect for holding your minis firmly to any magnetic surface, taking the guesswork out of buying magnets and making transporting your minis simple and safe. Cobalt Keep was started with the goal of bringing innovative and affordable products to the growing world of miniature hobbyists, and they have definitely succeeded. These bases are world class and underneath all my wargaming models. And if you shop with the code EOB10, you can get 10% off your purchase of Cobalt Keep bases. A big thanks to Cobalt Keep for giving my ogres something to stand on, and while the glue dries, I want to do a couple of little things to prepare for painting. And it involves this tote box. I have bought so many copies of Citadel skulls. I use the human skulls in the backpacks of my Black Templar, but this kit comes with a lot of other skulls. My ogres have a varied diet, and I want to represent this on the bases. These things are tiny, so while I was clipping them off the sprues, I left a little bit of sprue on each one so that they're easier to hold onto for painting and scraping mold lines. And I gave each of them a black prime and then a zenithal of white ink from above. Then, to give them a little extra texture, a sponging of white paint. I'm gonna be putting these on last, so I set them aside in my little bits bin, and hey, would you look at that? EOB dice, available from EonsBattle.com. The other thing I need to do to get my ogres ready is pinning. I threw a 1mm drill bit into my Dremel and set it on its lowest setting, and then drilled up through their feet. I used paper clips for the pins, but I would suggest getting 1mm brass rod, as the paper clips vary in size and are sometimes a little too big to fit nicely in the hole. These ogres have pretty big feet that can take a lot of glue, but the pinning will help them hold onto the base just a little bit more tenaciously, especially on top of the cork towers I've made for them. My bases are nice and dry-ish, good enough to get some more paint on there, and I'm really excited to try out my hypothesis of using like one bold saturated color on these bases. I really want to copy what I did with my Mournfangs. My Mournfangs fur is white, but like a really fun white, or a fantasy white. It gives the impression of white while being as interesting as possible. And that's what I'm hoping I can do with these bases. I prime the bases black. It takes a few coats from different angles to find all the little nooks and crannies in the cork, and after that I dusted on some dark blue. My hypothesis is fueled by looking at my favorite paintings from 40K. This is an idea employed by a lot of 40K artwork. Even though there's a lot of detail, the background is often one unified saturated color. This keeps the whole picture engaging while focusing the viewer on the stuff that really matters, the subjects. Whether it's the fiery orange hue of a John Blanche background or the ghostly green glow implying the otherworldly powers of the Necrons, it's not very realistic, but man, does it help with the storytelling. And the pictures without that saturated color feel a lot like my simpler bases. They're still good, but they lack a lot of the punchiness. A realistic background is very much what you see is what you get. Still good, but it loses something because of the color. After the blue, I dry brushed all the bases with a dark red brown. This is a similar hue to the blue, just brown, and it darkened the bases while keeping them nice and saturated. Then, and without cleaning my brush, I dry brushed the base with a pastel yellow. Because there was still some brown on my brush, I would get a few sweeps at bright yellow, and then the yellow would mix with the brown on my brush to make the tan that gives the bases a more natural feel. And to finish off that texture, I took my dry brush and yellow paint and stabbed it down onto the flat surfaces, leaving behind a texture. This stippling helps to brighten up the bases and leaves behind a natural texture. Right now, even though I haven't used very natural colors, my bases have a really nice feel to them, and I might do this exact same thing again if I'm ever painting some demons or cultists. But for now, it's time to turn these cold rock bases into Arctic bases. I grabbed some light tan tufts I bought a million years ago for a product I don't even remember and used them all on these bases, making some clumps where I was pretty sure feet wouldn't end up. Now it's time to make some snow. My favorite snow is Army Painter Battlefield Snow. This stuff is tiny plastic beads. The only thing I don't prefer is it doesn't have much of a glitter. To get that shininess, I poured my previous favorite snow, crushed glass. You can't get this anymore from Secret Weapon, but it's good for glitter. It's not great as a standalone because it's clear, so once you have it mixed with glues and mediums, it makes for very wet looking snow. I mixed these together 50-50 and then added some Elmer's glue to make this concoction sticky. And then enough matte medium to where it's about the consistency of hand lotion. So it sticks where you put it, but it levels out a little. Then I took my Radius paintbrush and started putting this over the bases. I covered about 75% of each base with snow, putting down a big pile and then using the point of my brush to push it around the base so it was nice and clumpy. And I made sure to shove it into the grass tufts. Now my bases are really realistic, but I find that realistic snow never looks that good. The white paint on the model can never match the white snow and it gets overpowered easily. Instead, I'm gonna tint it. I put some indigo ink into my airbrush and dusted this over the wet snow. This immediately knocked down a few hues, and then I sprayed some jade green ink covering more of the snow, giving it a tinge of blue-green. And now to get it green, I airbrushed yellow ink from above. This really changed the look of the snow and gave it an otherworldly feel. And you know what else has an otherworldly feel? That's right, EonsOfBattle.com. A membership on our website gives you a credit each month that you can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of September, we here at Eons of Battle are proud to announce the Whimsical Cottages. Fantasy buildings perfect for any game with a ye olde flair. Move your models around the quaint homes, the roomy houses, or set up shop with the tavern. With this terrain, you can make an entire town complete with pumpkins, giant mushrooms, and trees to really fill out a game board. With the snow painted but still wet, it's time to attach my ogres. I loaded up their feet with superglue and then stabbed them down into the cork, pressing their feet into the snow. And now the snow is dark and saturated. Tinting the snow like an emerald green was the perfect thing to darken it and make my miniatures really stand out on top of it. It does look a little bit silly, but I think it matches the artwork really nicely. And technically, that is not just snow, that is magical snow, because the ogres are cursed with the Everwinter, a little magical blizzard that follows them around wherever they go, and that's why the Ogor Mawtribes are nomadic, because they have to stay one step ahead of the blizzard, because they don't like it either. If they ever get caught up in the blizzard, they die, and so they always have to stay right in front of it. I am in love with my Ogor Mawtribe army, and I almost didn't pick it. What led me down the Spearhead rabbit hole is finishing Scaventide, and so then I had the Rat Spearhead, and then I played it against Nick's Cruel Boys, and we discovered that the game is actually really fun. And so me and my buddies, we immediately pulled up like the Warhammer website and started picking out Spearhead boxes that we were interested in, and we called a friend in the local game store, and everyone's Spearhead that they picked was in stock, but then I wanted the Caradron Overlords, the little sky dwarves. And they were very unsure of what that was or if they had it at the store. So we went down there and everybody got their box except me. The Caradron Overlords was not there, but there was a box of ogres. And immediately I was like, I could do the ogres. And so I got the box and here it is. Oh, and it's been so much fun. And they're not even done yet. I have the snow, it's time to make some icicles. I took the clear box from a grass tufts blister and started cutting it into tiny triangles. I find that when doing that, it's easier to just make a bunch and then choose instead of trying to cut each one correctly, and I superglued these to any spot on the cork that was sitting proud off of the base. Then I took one of my favorite things, UV Cure resin, and you better believe this stuff dries hard. I used a toothpick to spread it over the plastic and used my UV lamp to lock it down. I gave each icicle a few coats until they were nice and round. This UV is pretty thick, but it's still a little runny, so I had to hold the bases upside down while they cured, so I didn't end up with drippy icicles. Now I have crystal clear icicles, but I want to try another product I've picked up, Liquid Frost. I have no idea what this stuff's about, but it's supposed to make icy looking textures, so I put this over the icicles and it looked like absolutely nothing for about 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden it was crunchy white texture. I like it. I gave these a dusting of jade ink to make them match the bases, and then I grabbed the box of skulls I made and gave these a dusting of jade green and yellow. And I used this yellow to dust on the icicles too. Then it was time to add some gore. I shoved some blood for the blood god down in pools on the base, and then I superglued one skull in the middle. It's important to get the blood underneath, like these are the discarded bones after my gluttons have feasted. Then I took a chisel bristle paintbrush and a toothpick and loaded up some blood for the blood god, pulled back the bristles and let them snap forward, flinging the blood over the skulls and surrounding areas. The skulls are a perfect match for the palette of my bases, and the red is a fun accent color, and also matches my ogre's dapper pants. Then I painted the base rim with apple barrel gloss black paint. This stuff is great, and less than $1 for this whole tube. I got so incredibly lucky with my Ogor Mawtribe, which is an army I didn't really even plan to start. It was more of an impulse buy, but it was a perfect impulse buy because it turns out the Ogor Mawtribes are exactly my playstyle, my preferred playstyle. No tricks, no special rules, just girth, really good data sheets. Basically, every single person in this force is hitting on 4s, 50-50, but wounding on 2s, AP -1, damage 2. They just march forward, take a bunch of punishment, and then dish it back out. They are incredibly fun to play with, and there's only one thing left for this army, and that is the Tyrant. Now the reason my Tyrant is not done is because while I was putting together this force, I took a little look-see at the Games Workshop web store, and I saw the Man-Eaters, which are their own unit, but really they're just alternate sculpts for the Tyrants. And they're 3 different sculpts for like $100 and some bucks, which is a lot of money. But I really liked them, and so I thought, well, maybe if I'm only collecting a small amount of ogres, I can splurge and get the one that I really, really want. But I was smart and I did not pull the trigger. It's just sitting in my shopping cart. And as the weeks went by, I visited my friendly local gaming store and they happened to have some old models in stock, and one of them was the man-eater I wanted. And so by a happy accident, I got the exact sculpt I needed. It was really good that I waited. I love my ogres, and I've been growing to love them more and more. I actually took these guys half-painted to a 16-player friendly Spearhead tournament, and I very nearly won. A video on that came out earlier this week. I really like how the bases turned out, and how the saturated jade green looks under my ogres. It's not realistic, but you know what? Neither is an ogre, and I think it helps sell the fantasy world that they exist in. The terrain on screen right now is our whimsical cottages, available at EonsOfBattle.com. And you better believe my gluttons, Mournfangs, lead belchers, iron blasters, and even that tyrant when I get around to it will be eating well. Who knows? I might even beat Sean one of these days.